Welcome, everyone. Today, we're thrilled to have you here for our 2021 Partnerships Lab informational webinar. My name is Chris Cousineau. I'm the Director of Program Administration at the Institute for Urban Parks, and I'm very pleased to introduce my colleagues, Sarah Tracy, the Director of National Programs, and Gray Elam, the Director of New York City Programs. And before I turn it over to them, one thing to reiterate, you did not accidentally stumble on the webinar about mime school or a audition for a Beat Generation movie. We just happened to all be wearing the same color and the same turtlenecks, and I just want to reassure you, this is the both unity and partnership that you will find at the Institute. So I'll turn it now over to Gray and Sarah.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, in fact, we work very closely together, and so it's no surprise that we all dressed alike today. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's information session. Again, I'm Gray Elam. I'm the Director of New York City Programs with the Institute for Urban Parks here at the Central Park Conservancy. And again, I'm joined today by Sarah Tracy, the Director of National Programs, and Chris Cousineau, the Director of Program Administration at the Institute. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone but the panelists will be muted during this webinar. But we invite you to add your questions to the Q&A panel located at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be sure to address them later in the session. And we'll also be recording today's webinar to share with those who could not attend the session. So just as a heads up, we are recording. And lastly, we will be posting the application in the chat, so please feel free to reference it throughout today's call. Let's go to the next slide. So before we dive in, we'd like to provide you with a little bit of background. In 2013, the Central Park Conservancy founded the Institute for Urban Parks to provide professional education, capacity building, peer-to-peer exchange, and thought leadership to strengthen the field of urban park management. Since our inception, we provided support for over 600 parks around the world, trained over 300 New York City Parks Department employees, engaged over 100 Central Park Conservancy staff members in training programs, and provided over 3,000 hours of pro bono consulting services to park groups around the country. We host a wide range of programs that we encourage you to check out and learn more about on our website, and Chris is going to actually be posting our website in the chat momentarily. Let's head on to the next slide. There we go. The Partnerships Lab is a relatively new initiative of the Institute. In fact, we are just wrapping up our first cohort. And the Partnerships Lab was designed as an annually reoccurring 9-month collaboration and fellowship that leverages the resources and experience of the Conservancy to help urban park organizations build their own capacity to plan, develop, and maintain great public spaces. So what can you expect today? So leaving today's session, we want you to feel confident about 2 things. First, whether this program is the right fit for you and your organization. And second, if so, what kind of project to select. We're going to start by sharing the program overview, then we'll move on to what we've learned in the first year, and then we'll review the mechanics of the application, and from there we'll open it up to questions. We're going to spend roughly the next 10 minutes presenting on these items, and the remaining 30 minutes will be allocated to Q&A. Chris is going to post the agenda in the chat, and Sarah is going to kick us off with the program overview. So welcome, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all. So the Partnerships Lab is open to organizations or agencies that support urban parks in New York City and then throughout the United States. This is a 9-month engagement during which selected partners work with myself or Gray, Chris, other Institute staff members. Together, we work to clarify and evaluate your organizational challenge and develop a strategy. Depending on the scope of the project, we may even initiate the implementation of that strategy, depending on the timeline.
Thank you, Sarah. So in the first year of the program, we actually learned what elements make for a successful partnership. And we want to share some of these examples, some examples of projects that we think either would or would not be a good fit for the program. So to start, the Partnerships Lab was designed as a long-term fellowship rather than a one-and-done grant application. It requires organizational investment in order to get the most out of the program. Next, the Partnership Lab was designed to be a true thought partnership. This is a highly collaborative process with emphasis placed on the process rather than the deliverable. And last but not least, the Partnership Lab was designed to tackle challenges that are central to your organization's longevity and sustainability. The purpose of the Partnerships Lab is to help you find your way and move forward on a challenge that you've already got some skin in. So here's a couple of examples. The Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, located in New York City, applied to the Partnership Lab following the merger of two long-standing community organizations. The interim executive director applied knowing that the alliance would need help merging two boards to create a cohesive, functional board of directors that'd be active in raising reliable, recurring revenue. This is a really great example, and we're actually just wrapping up with them now, but it's a really great example for a couple of reasons. First, the challenge was really central to the organization's sustainability. Second, the executive director invested the time necessary to engage in a real collaboration and a true thought partnership. So the way that it worked is, we started by working with the executive director to articulate the organization's challenge and their goals. And from there, we interviewed each board member to learn what was working for them, what they were struggling with. And based on those interviews, we were able to craft recommendations. We then worked with the executive director and the board to take the first few steps together. That way, the two groups could practice working as one and building the cohesion necessary to achieve the remainder of the roadmap on their own. Next up, Sarah is going to describe her and Chris's work with the Downtown Austin Alliance Foundation.
Yeah, so we wanted to share another example, and this was one of our national partners from last year, the Downtown Austin Alliance Foundation. When they came to us with their application, they had a very, very well articulated challenge in regards to the programming and communications around a park called Republic Square, which is located in Austin's downtown in Texas. It was through the discovery process that we actually identified a much deeper issue regarding internal buy-in, that many of their staff members and supporters, partners, even board members didn't quite understand what the voice of Republic Square should be and whether or not to dedicate resources to it. So before addressing this much bigger challenge they described around identity and communications, we really had to understand how stakeholders perceived the space. We accomplished this by leading an internal focus group, collecting benchmark research, and ultimately presenting our results during an internal presentation to staff members, board members, and external partners. And this ended up leading to really, really enthusiastic support around the project. The Alliance and the Foundation were amazing partners through this project because of their flexibility, their thoughtful work, and their willingness to experiment by taking a step further back than they even expected, which ultimately really supported their longer-term goals. We also wanted to share a project example that would likely not be the right fit for the Partnerships Lab. So take, for example, an organization that has the goal of building a splash pad as part of a capital campaign or a master plan. The organization understands the operations, the vendors that are going to be needed, the public engagement that will be required. The project is simple, straightforward, and really primarily just requires funding. If you can see clearly from point A to point B for your project, we think the Partnerships Lab would likely cause some frustration. The Partnerships Lab is really meant for projects that would benefit from a long-term thought partnership, like some of the examples we described. So with that, we're also going to talk a little bit about the program schedule and time commitment. So here are some important dates. The applications for the Partnerships Lab are due on January 15th. Selected partners will be notified by February 12th. And from there, a discovery process will begin along with the program paperwork, which is always very important. From there, we're going to have the Foundations of Urban Park Leadership, which is a virtual retreat that will take place March 22nd through 24th. This is really the kickoff to the program where all of the organizations who are participating come together. We invite 3 staff members from each organization. So we're hoping to have a single point person who has decision-making, capacity and authority within their organization, and then 1 to 2 additional team members who are also going to support the project long term. In our experience, we've just found it's really important to have a few key staff members all working on the project from start to finish, because we know things get busy, things can change. We want to make sure everyone's up to speed from day one. This is another reason why we ask for multiple letters from stakeholders in the application. We just want to make sure at every level of your organization, everyone's aware that this kind of work is taking place. From there, we'll also have monthly cohort meetings with the entire group of participants. We'll have bi-weekly meetings with Institute directors, either Gray or myself, some other Institute staff as well. And then we'll have a final convening and evaluation, which will take place in December of next year. Oh, I think you're muted, Gray.
Thanks.
Perfect.
So what to consider when choosing a project? The questions here were really designed to help you assess whether your organization is a good fit for the Partnerships Lab. And we'll read through it quickly just so you can get an understanding of why we're asking each question. We'll also be sharing this deck with you after today's session. That way you can always refer back to it. And as always, you can always contact Sarah or myself, and we will be happy to talk through it with you. So first up, would resolving this challenge support organizational health and longevity? Essentially, we just want to know that the challenge you've identified is central to the success of your organization. Next, is the organization ready and willing to refine the proposed project and co-develop strategies with a partner? Basically, we want to know if you have the internal buy-in necessary to move the challenge forward. Does the organization understand the expertise and assistance needed to meet the proposed challenge? Really, what we're trying to get a grasp on here is what your understanding of the issue is, and what your thoughts are on its feasibility. The Institute will bring in subject matter experts as needed, so having an idea from you at the outset of the project what expertise is needed is really helpful to us, especially as we're reviewing applications. And lastly, and pretty straightforward, does the organization staff have the availability for the time commitments of the program? So we ask you to refer back to these questions and really use them to determine whether the program's the right fit for you and for your organization. Application highlights. So you'll see by just flipping through the application that there's really 3 distinct sections, and those are partnership benefits, eligibility, and selection criteria. We're not going to spend time covering these sections today since they're laid out in pretty good detail in the application, but we encourage you to take some time after today's call to review these 3 sections in detail. And again, as always, feel free to reach out to Sarah or myself. So as promised, we are now going to open it up to questions and use the rest of our time to help answer as many as possible. Sarah and I will add our contact information. Sarah's already added hers to the chat. So if you have any questions after today's webinar, just send us a line. We also ask you to submit any questions you might have through the Q&A panel that's located at the bottom of your screen. Use the Q&A panel instead of the chat if you don't mind, and we'll be answering questions from there. So off we go.
So it looks like we have one here from Michael. Is a program of this type viable for suburban and rural areas? That's a great question, Michael. So it is, we do focus this program on urban parks. And to give you a sense of the size of cities that we have previously worked with, it's usually populations of 100,000 plus. That does not mean we wouldn't be happy to read through an application. There are a lot of compelling projects out there, but that gives you a sense of scale and size for the types of cities we typically work with. And like we said, it's not a disqualifier, and we would be happy to review any application. There are a lot of great compelling projects out there.
Sarah Gray, another one. How many applicants were there last time? How many are anticipated this year?
Yeah, so great question. This past year, we actually had 5 participants, 5 national participants, and 3 New York City-based participants. This coming year, we're looking to have around 3 to 4 from each group. But of course, it will depend on the applications we receive and how that process goes. But yeah, we're aiming for around 3 to 4 and a total cohort of around 7 or 8.
In addition to the regular check-ins with the team, how many hours would you estimate that the first cohort spent on these projects per week?
Yeah, and Chris, you may have, Chris managed this program last year, so he may have a better sense, but to give you a sense, you know, this is a huge chunk of our roles. I spend at least 50% of my time of my entire job on this program. So there's definitely a good chunk of hours. Chris, you might have an estimated number of hours. I'm not sure.
I would estimate at least 5 to 6 hours per week is that's very rough, but some weeks we would meet multiple times if it was required, especially during processes when we were either doing like the focus groups or in-person meetings. One component, barring COVID-19 and travel concerns, much of this work will be done virtually via email. So I can imagine, as Sarah and Gray both alluded to, having like a week, the biweekly check-ins that will be an hour to an hour and a half per week.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think in the New York City, on our end, it was similar. I think maybe around 4 or 5 hours. And, a lot of it really depends on where you are in the process. It's not just one-on-one meetings with us, the Institute, but also talking to the, board members and different committees of the board. So we're really working collaboratively at all levels to move things forward. Ideally, this is dovetailing nicely with the work that is already on your docket, and challenges that are really central.
Gray, here's a good one. How does one gauge readiness for a group of friends of a New York City park? So they're a group of relative newbies active for a little over 2 years.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And I think, for us, in terms of eligibility, we're really looking for groups that have an active 501c3 status, and that manage or support the management of an urban park or public space and aspire to scale to a sustainable level. And that can be defined by you. I think that determination is, it is different depending on each group. And so we are, happy to have conversations outside of this format. But I think, if you feel like you're in a place where you're gearing up to become get to a more sustainable level, I think that would be a really exciting project. And again, I think the projects would really we'd be looking for things that are more pertaining to like strategic planning, board development, fundraising, communications, things that are more centralized. And then you have the capacity, right? If you only have a handful of people on staff, do you have the capacity? So that's not necessarily something we can determine for you, but something we'd love to talk to you more about.
Lisa Bloodgood asks, what if the project isn't necessarily a park, but a non-traditional open space or public space?
Yeah, that's a great question. Downtown Austin is actually a great example of that. It's technically a historic square. That was actually a huge piece of the project, is that most of their own staff members didn't even view it as a park, but it wasn't ultimately an active and functioning park. So definitely kind of in that realm, we would definitely be open to applications. Obviously, we're focused on parks, as you can imagine, but if your space is functioning and operating like an urban park, that definitely would be something we would take a look at.
Yeah, similarly, we worked with the Canal Conservancy this past year. They don't have a dedicated park space, but they work more at a neighborhood level. So I think, whatever format, park, be it a specific park or a series of parklets or just public space or plaza, it's not a problem.
Question about any examples of how the capacity building grant is used.
Yeah, I can, again, it's been used very widely and differently by different organizations because, as you can imagine, every city and project was so different. What we will say that it's a great matching opportunity. Again, downtown Austin, who you've heard a lot about, they ended up deciding to use their funding for community outreach because they wanted to better educate the local communities about Republic Square. But they were also really, really incorporating it into their fundraising strategy and very likely getting a match from one of their regular supporters. So there's a lot of great opportunity for that, which we wanted to mention. And it's really used, as long as it's used related to the project that we're working on together, you really have free reign about what that looks like, which is a good thing. You know, that's my favorite kind of grant as a former grant writer.
And I'll just add on to that, that, you know, it can be something that we're working on together, or it could be something that's kind of in the roadmap, right? So with Van Cortlandt Park Alliance here in New York City, we worked with them on kind of on merging the two boards, and what they're putting their grant towards is actually a strategic plan, which is one of the things we identified as a next step. So it can be tangentially related, but somehow still supporting that larger challenge and goal.
I'm just going to quickly answer a couple questions here. So somebody asked how many applications do we usually receive? So we've only had one application period so far. So that was the 2019-2020 Partnerships Lab, and we received approximately 30 applications from organizations around the country and in New York City. There's been a couple of specific questions about types of projects. So Juan at Downtown Dallas and Barbara Bearfield, People for Palmer Park, great to see you here. I would recommend reaching out to Sarah and Gray directly to talk through. Both of your projects are interesting, and it would be worth talking, reaching out to them further to detail them. And one other question I've seen several times is how much does it cost? So the cost of the Partnerships Lab, that's the Institute for Urban Parks covers the cost of the Partnerships Lab. What you as an organization can anticipate is the cost of your staff's time, like the point person that is working with the Institute.
And yeah, it looks like, just to piggyback off that, it looks like we've gotten a couple questions about how the grant is structured and how it works. So basically, you know, as we said, there's a stipend, a capacity building grant that we distribute at the beginning of the partnership. But you have in the contract, we know organizations well, we gave a long window for how you spend that money, and there's a lot of freedom in terms of how you end up spending it. Very, very little restriction, like we said, as long as it's related to the project that we worked on together. And we can talk through in much more detail about what that would look like for you if you have specific questions. Also, we have a question about how it's funded. So we have two very generous funders who fund this program. For the national partners, it's the JPB Foundation. For the New York City partners, it's the Prospect Hill Foundation. This is the second year of the Partnerships Lab. Last year, they kind of operated as two programs because they were funded differently initially. This is the year where we join everyone together because we saw such great collaboration among our partners. So while they are still funded differently, and believe us, we're still actively fundraising all the time for the program, that's kind of how it's structured.
Another question would be, is there a preference given to organizations with missions that focus on equity or work with historically underserved neighborhoods?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it really, we're looking, one of the questions in the application when you go through it is we're looking for you to kind of tell us how you're addressing issues of equity. And there's a wide range of, you know, ways that people are doing that, but that's something that we're taking into consideration here, and we'd love to hear from you kind of what that looks like for you and your organization.
A number of folks too have been asking about could they run ideas by both of you in advance of preparing the application?
Yes, please, we'd welcome that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and also in terms of the grant, I see a couple of people asked about the actual size. So to give you a sense of what happened last year, all of that's still being determined. Like I said, funded differently, and we are actively fundraising for the rest of the program, but national partners received in the range of about $25,000. New York City partners, depending on the total number of partners that are selected, received somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000. Like we said, it's a great matching opportunity. I just love planting that seed because so many of our partners found that to be helpful.
Another great question. Are we looking for geographic diversity in our park partners?
I think that's a really great question. You know, New York City very diverse itself, but obviously a clearer path to what city Gray will be working in. For the national partners, it really is mostly project-based. We are looking for the most kind of feasible, interesting, and important projects. So it really isn't determined by city, it's much more determined by project. But we do try and reach as many cities as possible. And we reached, we were in different cities all over the country last year.
Couple questions here in the chat. E.B. Brooks from Monkus Park asks, so is the resulting solution for the applicant worked into a white paper that will be made available through the Institute for Urban Parks or elsewhere? Can we find a full list of this year's project concepts? And does that mean projects that resemble any from this year will be less interesting?
I can speak to that a little bit. Certainly not. I mean, if we worked on a real range of projects this past year, and if we're really looking for the selection criteria that's outlined in the application, and that's regardless of whether we did something similar to it last year or not. It's really about you, your organization, how ready you are, what your challenge looks like, kind of on a case-by-case basis. And I also think, just to refer back to the application, take a look at the selection criteria would be a really good place to start. And then, of course, we're happy to kind of talk through any specific ideas you have. We don't have white papers for each organization, but we do have initial blurbs when we first announced them last year that we'd be happy to follow up with you and share. And we don't distribute white papers after. Just even to share information about Van Cortlandt Park Alliance or Austin, we actually, connected with the organizations and spoke to them about it beforehand. So there is, respecting the process and the people who are involved and all privacy.
Here's a question. Can you describe the opportunities to engage with and build a peer network that's been mentioned as one of the benefits?
Absolutely. That's one of, we feel, the most important benefits of this actual program. So like we said, everyone will be convened together at several touch points throughout the 9 months. So it will be at the virtual retreat. We'll also have monthly meetings where all of the groups will gather together and talk about their respective projects. We'll have a final convening, so that we've built into the program several touch points that you all can really continuously talk to each other as much as you want or don't want throughout the program, because we've really found that there is a wonderful mutual support of urban park professionals that really want to lean on each other through this experience as they go through it together.
And the other thing we found is that a lot of our participants in the Institute programs tend to go from one program to another. So we have people who've participated in leadership programs, or a certificate that's led by Philip, that's moving over to the Partnership Lab and vice versa. So there's a lot of kind of cross engagement with folks who are kind of plugged into the Institute, and we really encourage and support that.
There was several questions about just the number of applications. So again, that first round, we got approximately 30, and I believe 2/3 were from national, and about 1/3 came from New York City. Folks are also asking about who were the organizations in 2019, 2020.
Yeah, so for national, and again, also, you don't have to write all of this down. We have all of our current partners listed on the Partnerships Lab webpage, which we can put in the chat. But for national, we worked with the Downtown Austin Alliance Foundation. We worked with Parks and People in Baltimore. We worked with the City of Detroit. We worked with Balboa Park Conservancy in San Diego, and we also worked with Park Organization in Baltimore, not Baltimore, sorry, we did, but also in Portland, Oregon. So yeah, we were kind of all over the map with some really great conservancies, but also a city government.
And on the New York side, we worked with the Alliance for Flushing Meadow Corona Park, we worked with the Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, and we worked with the Gowanus Canal Conservancy.
And just to also address, I've seen this come up a few times too, is the grant size is the same for every partner, depending on whether it's national or New York City, and it doesn't vary from project to project. That came up a couple times.
Another one, looks like several folks have asked how many people would be on a call if they call to ask about their project proposal?
Yeah. It would likely be, 2 institute staff is typically what we do for those kind of first initial calls. And it'll likely be some combo of the 3 of us, just talking you through whatever questions you might have. Yeah, so that's will be made available at that very first stage.
I just want to reassure, several folks have asked, is it going to be recorded? So yes, this webinar will be recorded. We will be posting it on the website. So if you have other staff or colleagues or board members that you want to share this with before preparing your application, you will be able to do so. Let's see here. I would definitely, a number of folks are asking about different types of projects. I strongly encourage you all to reach out to Gray and Sarah, and then we can have a follow-up conversation with you.
And Stacy, just to piggyback off that, Stacy, hi Stacy, asked about examples of projects that were rejected and why. So earlier in the presentation, we tried to give that example of like the super clear point A to point B. We need to build a splash pad. We know what we need to do it. And it's as simple as that. Those types of projects are probably not the right fit because the other projects that we described were super iterative, long-term, super unclear in the beginning. And that's why the partnership lab was so important to their thought process. To really give you a sense, it's more of kind of the problem you haven't yet been able to figure out or take the time to figure out, and something you need support thinking through. So hopefully that gives you a better sense. But if it's just like, we need to pop a splash pad in our park, this is probably, like we said, will probably frustrate you. Your time is valuable. We want to avoid that.
I've also seen a couple questions that speak to projects, like submitting a project that has already started, or a project that might extend for several years beyond the scope of this. Is work like that, like a project like that, acceptable for the program?
Yeah, I think really whatever stage you're at, be it the very infancy of a project or tackling a challenge or a project that you've been banging your head against a wall for a while, if you feel like you would benefit from having, collaborating with the Institute and having a thought partner and, the resources that we can kind of bring to that challenge, addressing that challenge, I think that's exactly what we're looking for. So it's really less about where you are in the process, just as long as you can identify the challenge, you can you understand it enough to know really what you're looking for, like what kind of expertise needs to be brought in. Maybe you've tried to tackle it a couple different ways. We're looking for that kind of clarity of what the problem looks like. And we'll have time at the very beginning of, once we kick off in the very beginning of March, we'll have some time to do discovery and kind of test the vision and clarify the goal and clarify the challenge. But just having a little bit of forethought around that, I think, is really important.
I think I missed one about, someone asked about the virtual retreat. Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the virtual retreat is going to be taking place on Zoom in March. And that's the first kind of kickoff convening. We get everyone together. We go through several workshops together so that you can all meet each other, start to think about your project a little bit more, meet the Institute staff. It's 2 days of kind of, I would say, fun but intensive work together to kick us off and set us all off on the right course for the 9 months of partnership.
Yeah, and I think March 22nd to March 24th, and it's a bit of a leveling up, right? We'll be providing strength training classes and different types of workshops to kind of rather level set. So we're all kind of starting at the same page and providing a little bit of that initial kind of capacity building work together.
Perfect. we were, somebody asked how were people orgs on this call today found and invited to apply? This came from our Institute mailing list that we've collected organically over the past 7 years since the Institute has developed. So if you received an email and an invite at some point, you had a touch point with us in some capacity, be it a direct program or a conference.
Just to clarify about the grant sizes that just came up in the chat. So the national partners are funded separately from the New York City partners. The national partners last year, all across the board, each received a grant of $25,000. The New York City partners received between $6,000 and $8,000. That depends on the number of total partners, not the partners themselves, if that helps clarify.
Liza Ewell asks a great question. Would all 2 or 3 participants from the organization participate in the group calls and retreats, or just the primary point person?
So the virtual retreat, we invite 3 people from each organization to attend the virtual retreat. And then I think, there's some discretion on your end. If you feel like all 3 people should be joining the monthly check-in or the bi-weekly calls, a little bit of that is just kind of where we are in the project, what your capacity is. But if there's really one main point person, I think the idea of having 3 people attend the virtual retreat is that it's a benefit also for you and for your peers and your staff, but also it's kind of good to have a collective understanding within your organization of the work that we're doing, and the virtual retreat is a place to really kind of set that expectation.
And I'll just add to what Grace said, for any organization where immediately they're getting nervous that, oh, we only have like 1 executive director, we only have 1 staff person. We had several park organizations at the retreat where one of their participants was a board member. Another organization, actually, one of the participants they are a park nonprofit, and they invited someone from the city agency to attend the retreat. So there was a level of partnership there. So there is flexibility and creativity in that, and don't feel if you are an organization of just 2 people that immediately counts you out of that.
Yeah, it really comes down to who has the kind of decision-making capacity at your organization, right? So that might be a board member, it might be a staff, it might be, a volunteer. That's really for you guys to tell us, but just folks who are able to actually, make a decision and have some authority.
Elizabeth from Friends of Mashalou Parkland, she asked about fiscal sponsorship. So they're a fiscally sponsored organization by City Parks Foundation, and their goal is to move into a 501c3. Is that an issue for whether or not they are eligible or ineligible for the program?
That's a really great question, Elizabeth. And I think this is something that we should just connect and talk more about. But I think, I think it's a pretty interesting challenge and would be something that we'd welcome working on.
And Margaret also had a great question here, that their organization is newer to the Urban Park game, and the Partnerships Lab might be not the right moment for them. We do have a ton of other programs at the Institute. Check out our website. We'd be also happy to talk you through any of those programs, but we have Urban Park Roundtables, which are open to any urban park professional. We also have certificate programs, leadership programs. We have a lot of great stuff. So if Partnerships Lab is a little bit intense for you right now, no worries. We have a lot to offer.
Let's see. I think we covered most of them, and please drop one in before we wrap up here.
One I think closing question. Margaret, yeah, she asked about capacity and what we mean by capacity, and I think that's a really great question because we keep referring to capacity building. So I'm glad you asked that question. Actually, thank you. Really, what this program is about is, it's not about, as Sarah was saying, if you can see from A to B and it's a simple, straight line project, something that you could hire a consultant to do. That's not really what this program is about. This program is about working with you to get you the resources you need and to help do some of the heavy lifting to move a challenge forward so that you have the capacity as an organization to move forward and to kind of implement a roadmap on your own. We will, strive to kind of articulate the challenge, develop a strategy in collaboration with you, outline a roadmap, and even begin taking initial steps and implementing the kind of various objectives of that roadmap to the extent that we can within the scope of the program. But we want you to be able to, when the program ends 9 months from now, or next December, we want you to feel like you are in a stronger place to tackle a challenge than you were when you started. And that's our goal.
And Juan, I know you had a quick question about the kinds of projects the grant funded in different cities. So it kind of ran the gamut. For Detroit, it was all about kind of how they engage corporate sponsors. For Austin, it was about defining the voice of their space. So they ended up using it for public outreach, or will be using it for public outreach. For Parks and People in Baltimore, they're using it to address their current relationship with the city and the steps they need to take along with their board members in order to kind of set on a path about their agreement. So like we said, it's quite a wide variety. We really try not to limit how you want to spend those funds. And so the hoop is wide, to jump through. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Okay, and this actually puts us, we're right at 2:45, maybe actually 2:46, so we're a minute over. So we will bid you all adieu for this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Gray and Sarah, for walking us through the Partnerships Lab. And as I've reiterated, and both Gray and Sarah have, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can, if you lose our contact info, you can also find it on our website, on the Institute website, in the Meet the Staff section. Our emails are on there. So we look forward to reading your applications and hearing from you in the coming months.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.